Good afternoon, good morning, maybe good evening. Welcome to this Fleet Forum webinar. Before we get started, if one of you or maybe two of you can just let me know if you can hear me loud and clear in the chat, that would be really, really helpful so that I know that I'm not talking to myself. Super. I see some thumbs up. That's also good. So my name is Roos van Stijn. I'm the Fleet Forum Development Director. You might have expected my colleague Paul here today, but he asked me to take over because he's taking a little bit of a short break. So again, welcome to this webinar where today we're gonna talk about how to set targets for your fleet emissions. Um, so it's going to be a little bit of an interactive webinar. I would like you to use the chat box. You can use that to introduce yourself. You can use that to ask questions. You can use that to share your experiences. Because the more as a community, the more how we well collaborate and provide information to each other, the better it is, right? So feel free to use the chat box. I've also prepared a poll, which we will use which will be used shortly. But let's get started. So before we go into the topic of today, I want us to take a little step back. Is why are we addressing this year so many webinars to the topic of sustainability and, to be more specific, environmental sustainability? And the reason for that is that many of Fleet Forum's member organizations have agreed to work on sustainability commitments. And what you see on the screen right now is the commitments that many of your organizations, if you are a Fleet Forum member, have signed up to. And the first one is to set a baseline and a target for the largest fleets in their organizations, uh, more or less representing at least 50% of the global fleet. So that is a commitment that many of your organizations have made is, okay, first we want to set a baseline, we want to know how many emissions we have, and then we also want to set a target for us to reduce these emissions. And other commitments that organizations have signed up to, which will help to achieve those targets, is that within 5 years, 25% of the vehicles of our organizations are Euro 3 standard or higher. And the last one is within 3 years, our organization participates in vehicle sharing initiatives. And because our organizations have signed up to that, we as Fleet Forum want to, well, raise a lot of awareness for it, raise a lot of attention, but also provide some guidance, advice, information on how you can do that. So today we're going to specifically focus on the first topic, the first item or the first commitment, and that is set a baseline. We addressed that previously, but definitely on set targets for the largest fleets in your organizations. So maybe let's start with a poll, and I will launch that right now. So how many of you have uh, do have a target for the reduction of your fleet emissions? And you will see the poll in the chat, but I think it also appears on screen. So feel free to start answering, and I'll give it a couple of seconds. I already see that people are. So we have many people on the call. We have 39 in total, and at the moment we do see 7 responses. So please use the chat box to see, okay, well, do you have a target for the reduction of your fleet emissions? And it could also be that you don't know, that maybe somewhere in the organization, in a sustainability department or at HQ level, people have decided on a target, but you might not know. So that is also a good answer. Don't feel shy to tell us like it is, right? So I'll leave it. I see Salai. Some people have issues with firewalls. So I see I'm unable to vote. My answer is no. Your organization have disabled this feature. Interesting. But I see that from the people who are able to vote, that the majority of you say, yes, we do have a target for that. We do have a target. And that also in the chat, I do see able to vote. The answer is no, 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 no. So if I sort of look at the people who can vote, and the people who cannot vote, maybe we are at 50-50. And I like also what Carl is saying in the chat is that we do have an overall target for logistics, but not specifically for the vehicles. And of course, today we will focus specifically on the targets for vehicles, right? So what I will do is I will close the poll. Thank you very much for participating. And let's move on. Now, target setting, when we talk about target setting, we talk about a process, right? So you have to, whenever you set a target, you cannot do that just by saying, oh, well, I would like to reduce 30%. You need to think about it. You need to think it through. And maybe here are some pointers which can help you when you are in the process of target setting, or when you are invited to think with your organization about what targets to set. So first of all, we always advise to understand your current position. Understanding your current position is basically having your baseline. Is knowing how many vehicles you have right now, how many liters of fuel you are using right now, knowing what the emissions are that you are producing right now. So understand where you are at the moment. Then from then on, you want to engage your stakeholders. You want to get information around, okay, what is possible, what is feasible, but also where can you make the most impact, right? Try to avoid to put a lot of energy in actions that only result in low performance or in low results overall. So understand your current position, and then from then onwards, engage your stakeholders. Then identify the opportunities, and we will discuss that later on. Yeah, and it goes a little bit back to what I was saying out. Okay, where do you get the greatest impact? From which of the actions is that? And then last but not least, set a target. So these are the steps that we would recommend you take when you think about setting your targets, or when you are involved in setting a target. Don't jump too quickly into the actual target, but really go through the motions of understanding where you are right now, engaging your stakeholders, and then identifying the opportunities that you might have as an organization. So maybe go back a little bit, is that the main driver for your carbon emissions, and again, today we are talking about fleet specifically, is the burning of fuel. It's a very simple thing, but because we are using those vehicles, we are using motorbikes, we are using trucks, that is when we are also burning fuel, because the majority of the humanitarian vehicle fleet are still the ICE vehicles or ICE transport assets. So your target should be based on the reduction of fuel usage. So we should look at which actions should lead to the reduction of that, right? So you can calculate your current emissions using the kilometers driven, the fuel used, and then looking at that part of the fuel, that part of the emissions. What is the percentage of that, looking at the overall emissions of the organizations? So, for example, if you have a very, very small fleet, or if you are using 90% of soft mobility modes, so for example, you ask your people to walk or to cycle or to use public transport, then the percentage of your fleet might be very, very small looking at the overall emissions. And then you might think like, I'm not going to focus so much on my fleet right now. But I think for many of us, we do understand that fleet has a significant is a significant portion of our emissions. So therefore, we would like to look at that. So when you calculate your emissions, that's where you set your baseline. So for your baseline, it is good to have a good insight in your fuel consumption, the totals and the consumption per kilometer. Now, if your organization has its own tool, we advise you to use it. But we also know that many of the organizations do not have a specific tool to calculate the emissions for the vehicles or for the transport. And then what was agreed by the Fleet Forum member organizations is to use the Fleet Forum Clean Fleet Toolkit. And that one can be found on our knowledge platform. We can also share the link when we send the link to the recording of this webinar later on. But use that because you only need limited information. The number of kilometers driven per vehicle type, you need the numbers of the liters of fuel used per vehicle type, and then you will get insight in the emissions that your organization or that your fleet is producing. So these are the two suggestions that we have. Then, as you remember, step 2 was engage your stakeholders. So what we would recommend is to engage your manager and understand the organization's objectives. So your manager will have some expectations with how high or how low he wants the emissions from the fleet to be reduced. So that helps you to get a grip on your target or get an understanding. And maybe there are objectives for the whole organization that you need to stick to. What we hear from at Fleet Forum when we talk to our members and when we talk to the community, but also in trainings, is that organizations might have set an overall objective, right? So they say, okay, in 2030, we want to have reduced our emissions with, let's say, 50%. Now, is that 50% throughout the whole organization? So that means that fleet needs to reduce 50%, programs 50%, procurement 50%. So everybody needs to reduce the same target. Or does the organization say, overall, we want to reduce 50%, but we know from our analysis, we know from our calculation, we know from our baseline that procurement has the highest impact. So we want procurement to reduce maybe 70% and fleet only 30%. So that's also what you need to know because that helps you in setting your target. Then identify opportunities before you start. And we cannot say it enough. And you might have heard us say it all over and over again, but we will continue to drive this message, is that the cleanest kilometer is the kilometer that you don't drive. So every kilometer that you can avoid by putting actions in place is the best thing for the sustainability of your organization. It is also the most safest option that you can choose. So keep that in mind, that whenever you start with identifying your opportunities, that you always look at it from, okay, how can I avoid driving kilometers? What we use always is the avoid, shift, improve methodology. And the way you want to look at it is that you always focus again on do not drive those kilometers. So that is everything that you can do to avoid. You avoid and reduce the need for motorized travel. So here you can think about optimizing your fleet, optimizing your journeys, introducing people to vehicle sharing. Well, there is a lot of opportunities that you can do. Also promote remote working with your colleagues, because like I said, the cleanest kilometer is the kilometer not driven. Then once you have identified all the actions in the avoid area, and you cannot avoid anymore, then you want to go to the shift. So then you want to shift from, okay, instead of using those vehicles, instead of using those fuel burning assets, let's call them that, can we shift to more environmentally friendly modes? Can we promote public transport? Can we promote walking or cycling? And again, this needs to be seen in the context of where you are operating, right? So if you are working in an environment where you have good public transport and it is safe to walk, then you should promote that as much as you can. We also hear some organizations now saying, okay, well, if meetings, especially in capital cities, if meetings are taking place within a kilometer or within 2 kilometers, we will not provide transport anymore. We are encouraging our staff to walk, which I think is great, because that also shows that, well, A, it's healthy, and B, it is a good way to drive the message and the ambition in the organization that you want to reduce, right? So first avoid, then shift. And then if you have shifted everything and you cannot shift anymore, then you want to improve. And you want to improve then the energy efficiency of transport modes. And that's where you look at fuel economy. So can you maybe move from big, heavy 4x4s to lighter ones? Can you use more city vehicles? Can you use vehicles that have a better efficiency, so newer vehicles? So these are sort of the things that you need to think about. And of course, there also we talk about electric mobility and renewable energies. But again, do it in that sequence, avoid, shift, improve, because the cleanest kilometer is the kilometer that we do not drive. Then also when you identify opportunities, you should engage people. So maybe as an open question to all of you, and you can use the chat. We already talked about engaging your manager, but who are other people that you might want to engage? Maybe you can give me some of your ideas in the chat. Let me see. Yeah, so passengers, exactly. And it's an interesting one, and thanks, Desalen, to bring that up, because yeah, the staff, so passengers, staff, team members, staff. I see a lot of staff and passengers. And the interesting thing is, I think if you would do a survey amongst your passengers or amongst your staff, a lot of people are interested, and a lot of people want to actively help you reducing emissions, because I think environmental sustainability is sort of at the forefront of all of our thinking, right? How can we reduce it? How can we turn climate change? How can we do better? So engaging passengers in your target setting really, really helps your other staff. Also ask them how ambitious do they want to be, and also knowing that with those ambitions also come consequences, right? So if we say, oh, we are really, really ambitious and we want to reduce as much as possible in the shortest period of time, that always also means that staff needs to make changes to their behavior. I think that the most well, the most obvious one is if you say, okay, well, we want to start vehicle sharing, we want to optimize our journeys, then what staff needs to do, or what other people need to do, is to be better at time management, because without that, it is going to be really, really a really big struggle to put that in place. Now, gathering ideas from other staff, I see environmental unit, all staff members, fleet focal staff, maybe fleet managers in and outside your organizations, to gather ideas, to see, okay, what are other people doing and how can we learn from that? But the idea is really to brainstorm, to identify areas where you can reduce emissions. So ask people for their ideas, how to stop driving, how to set up vehicle sharing, how to even do only one shared trip a day. Even start small. Don't start with big, 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 but start with small initiatives that you can then grow and then get better at it. And then, of course, in the improvement sections, there's quite a lot of there. Right profiling, like I said before, making sure that you use the right vehicle, and try out lighter vehicles, smaller vehicles to see, okay, do they work in my environment? Replace older vehicles, but also invest in trip planning, eco driving with your drivers. They can have a huge impact on your fuel consumption. And then, of course, also increase the occupancy rates. Make sure that if the vehicle can hold 4 passengers, that you should always aim to have 3 seats filled as a standard. And I know that probably some of you will say, like, oh, Rose, that's not possible, but we need to give ourselves those targets, right? We need to prioritize that, because if we don't do that, then we will never then we will never going, blah, then we will never achieve what we want to achieve. Ooh, sometimes talking is difficult. Then once you have gathered all those ideas, what would be good is to identify which of those ideas has the highest impact. And of course, the one where you have a high impact and a high ease of implementation, that is the one that you want to focus on. And that's the one where you want to take action right now, because these are major opportunities, right? And you want to implement those as soon as you can. Now, of course, the one where you say, well, the impact is low, and it also it's very, very challenging to implement that. So we have a low ease of implementation. Those, don't focus on those. It's a waste of your time. It's a waste of your energy. And really, really focus on the ones where you have the high impact and a high ease of implementation. And then if you say, well, it's a high impact, but the ease of implementation might not be so high. It's a low one. Then you might want to plan that one, maybe a little bit a little bit ahead in time. And of course, the one when you are, it has a low impact, but a high ease of implementation. Those are your quick wins as well. And like I said, starting with 1 shared vehicle trip per day it's low impact. It's not going to change the world, but the ease of implementation is high, because you just need to find more than one person in the car, apart from the driver. And preferably do that also with others, in between programs or in between organizations. And it's a high implementation. So people can start thinking about, like, hey, this is what we're going to do in our organization. And then you can scale up in the future. Now, this is an example from one of the Fleet Forum members, where they really looked at, okay, so if we are gonna implement some of these actions, what is the impact then? So they really try to also look at, okay, well, if we are doing, for example, if we are going to invest in eco driving, then we are expecting this return on our investment, not only from a cost perspective, but mostly from a sustainability and an emission reduction perspective. So that is also how you can make it visible to the organization. Like, okay, what is it that we expect, and what are the actions that we would like to take because we are expecting that? And then one of my last tips when setting a target for your emissions is focus. Take some time to really, well, think through your targets, gather your ideas, and then once you have selected those ideas based on impact and ease of implementation, focus. Make sure that you allocate time in your agenda to work on these ideas, to implement them, to review them, to maybe adjust them if it's not going as planned. But make sure that you focus on it, and that you set some time apart to work on it. And then, of course, an important one is to set your targets in a smart way. So just saying, oh, well, we want to reduce fuel by 5%. that is not so smart. Better is it to say, for example, well, we want to reduce our fuel usage by 5% by reducing the number of trips to our field locations by December 2024. So it needs to be specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-bound, right? And also communicate it in that way so that people in your team, but also in the organization, know that it is crystal clear what you are up to. Now, some good news to end with. So less kilometers driven means less fuel and therefore reduction of your carbon emissions. So again, the cleanest one is the one not driven. Less kilometers also mean that you are, of course, reducing your costs, right? Because fuel, that doesn't come cheap nowadays. And less kilometers also means less vehicles on the road and therefore less road safety risks, which is also important to consider in your environmental sustainability actions. So I know that we are a little bit short on time, so let me recap very, very quickly so we have time for a couple of questions. Understand your current position first, get insight in your emissions, do your baselining, then understand the objectives of your organization, determine the impact of your initiatives by using that avoid, shift, improve approach. Then gather a lot of ideas and initiatives and then rate them on their impactfulness, set your smart targets and engage your team and other stakeholders. Well, I've said it already 3 times, but the cleanest kilometer is the one not driven. And when you are looking at the actions, always focus on the ones that are avoiding emissions and that are helping you to shift to lower emission modes. So those are the biggest impact makers. That was it. If there are questions, I see Carl is giving a great suggestion. So set maximum limits for engine size and categorize different types of vehicles. Yeah, so that really should be captured then in your fleet policy. And I agree to that. There are questions. I'm just scrolling through the chat, but I don't. Okay. So yeah, setting limits is definitely a good one. Also, when you are procuring vehicles, please procure and set your specifications based on requirements. And it could well be that the vehicle that you are replacing, let's assume that you have a very, very old, heavy 4x4 vehicle and you want to replace them. Don't assume automatically that you have to replace it with the same vehicle, but really look at, okay, where are we going to use this vehicle? How are we going to use this vehicle? Before you set your requirements, because requirements might have changed over the years. The infrastructure and the operating environment might have changed over the years. And I know it might be easier to just take the old requirements and make your specifications based on that, right? But if you do that, then we know that you might not have the vehicle that is fit for purpose and that suits your profile. So take that into account as well. Okay, if there are no more questions, or if there are no questions, I should say, then I would like to thank you. As always, we will be sending the link to this webinar later today or maybe tomorrow morning. What we also will include there is the link to the Clean Fleet Toolkit. For those of you who are not familiar with that tool, try it out. Like I said, it is an easy to use tool. You just need a couple of basic informations and then you can calculate your emissions. Another great source of information, especially on that avoid, shift, improve actions, is the Green Me platform that we developed. and that give you guidance in, okay, well, I've done my benchmark, I've set my targets, and now what options can I use? And that allows you to select those options, work on them, and you can keep track of them as well. So we will include those two links. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, and I hope to see you next time when we are addressing selecting the most optimal types of vehicles for your fleet. Again, thanks, and have a great rest of the day. Bye bye.